He had been sitting at the table's opposite end, and I had assumed he was another poet. But that assumption was wrong. "I've long wanted to do what you're doing," the young man said. "But if you want to stop my brother insulting you, then you'll have to kill him. And family honor will insist I shall have to kill you. And I'm not sure I want to do that." I eased my arm from Lancelot's throat. For a few seconds he stood there, trying to breathe. Then he shook his head, spat at me, and walked back to the table. His nose was bleeding, his lips swelling, and his carefully oiled hair hung in sad disarray. His brother seemed amused by the fight. "I'm Galahad," he said, "and proud to meet Derval Cadern." I thanked him, then forced myself to cross to King Ban's chair, where, despite his avowed dislike of respectful gestures, I knelt down. "For the insult to your house, Lord King," I said, "I apologize, and submit to your punishment." "Punishment?" Ban said in a surprised voice. "Don't be so silly, it's just the wine, too much wine. We should water our wine as the Romans did, shouldn't we, Father Selwyn?" "Ridiculous thing to do," the old priest said. "No punishment, Derval," Ban said. "And do stand up, I can't abide being worshipped. And what was your offence? Merely to be avid in argument, and where is the fault in that? I like argument, isn't that so, Father Selwyn? A supper without argument is like a day without poetry." The king ignored the priest's acid comment about how blessed such a day would be. "And my son Lancelot is a hasty man. He has a warrior's heart and a poet's soul, and that, I fear, is a most combustible mix. Stay and eat." Ban was a most generous monarch, though I noted that his Queen Elaine was anything but pleased at his decision. She was grey-haired, yet her face was unlined and contained a grace and calm that suited Innis Treeb's serene beauty. At that moment, though, the Queen was frowning at me in severe disapproval. "Are all Domnonian warriors so ill-mannered?" she asked the table at large in an acid voice. "You want warriors to be courtiers?" Selwyn retorted brusquely. "You'd send your precious poets to kill the Franks? And I don't mean by reciting their verses at them, though come to think of it, that might be quite effective." He leered at the Queen, and the three poets shuddered. Selwyn had somehow evaded the prohibition on ugly things in Innis Treebs, for without the cowl he had worn in the library, he appeared as an astonishingly ill-favoured man, with one sharp eye, a mildewed eye-patch on the other, a sour, twisted mouth, lank hair that grew behind a ragged tonsure line, a filthy beard half hiding a crude wooden cross hanging on his hollow chest, and with a bent, twisted body that was distorted by its stupendous hump. The grey cat that had been draped about his neck in the library was now curled on his lap, eating scraps of lobster. "Come to my end of the table," Galahad said, "and don't blame yourself." "But I do," I said. "It's my fault. I should have kept my temper." "My brother," Galahad said, when the seating had been rearranged, "my half-brother, rather, delights in goading people. It's his sport. But most daren't fight back because he's the Edling, and that means one day he'll have powers of life and death. But you did the right thing." "No, I did the wrong thing." "I won't argue. But I will get you ashore tonight." "Tonight?" I was surprised. "My brother does not take defeat lightly," Galahad said softly. "A knife in the ribs while you're sleeping. If I were you, Derval Cadern, I should join your men ashore and sleep safe in their ranks." I looked down the table to where the darkly handsome Lancelot was now being consoled by his mother as she dabbed at the blood on his face with a napkin dampened by wine. "Half-brother?" I asked Galahad. "I was born to the king's lover, not to his wife." Galahad leaned close to me and explained softly. "But father has been good to me, and insists on calling me Prince." King Ban was now arguing with Father Selwyn about some obscure point of Christian theology. Ban was debating with courteous enthusiasm, while Selwyn was spitting insults, and both men were enjoying themselves hugely. "Your father tells me you and Lancelot are both warriors," I said to Galahad. "Both?" Galahad laughed. "My dear brother employs poets and bards to sing his praises as the greatest warrior of Armorica, but I've yet to see him in the shield line." "But I have to fight," I said sourly, "to preserve his inheritance." "The kingdom's lost," Galahad said carelessly. "Father has spent his money on buildings and manuscripts, not soldiers. And here in Istrebes we're too far from our people, so they'd rather retreat to Broceliande than look to us for help. The Franks are winning everywhere. Your job, Derval, is to stay alive and get home safe." His honesty made me look at him with a new interest. He had a broader, blunter face than his brother, and a more open one. The kind of face you would be glad to see on your right-hand side in the shield line. A man's right side was the one defended by his neighbour's shield, so it served to be on good terms with that man. And Galahad, I felt instinctively, would be an easy man to like. "Are you saying we shouldn't fight the Franks?" I asked him quietly. "I'm saying the fight is lost, but yes, you're oath-bound by Arthur to fight, and every moment that Inistrebes lives is a moment of light in a dark world. I'm trying to persuade Father to send his library to Britain, but I think he'd rather cut his own heart out first. But when the time comes, I'm sure he'll send it away. Now," he pushed his gilded chair away from the table, "you and I must leave before," he added softly, "the Fili recite. Unless, of course, you have a taste for unending verses about the glories of moonlight on reed beds." I stood and rapped the table with one of the special eating knives that King Ban provided his guests. Those guests now eyed me warily. "I have an apology to make," I said, "not just to you all, but to my Lord Lancelot. Such a great warrior as he deserved a better companion for supper. Now, forgive me, I need to sleep." Lancelot did not respond. King Ban smiled. Queen Elaine looked disgusted, and Galahad hurried me first to where my own clothes and weapons waited, then down to the flame-lit quay, where a boat waited to take us ashore. Galahad, still dressed in his toga, was carrying a sack that he slung onto the small boat's deck. It fell with a clang of metal. "What is it?" I asked. "My weapons and armour," he said. He untied the boat's painter, then leapt aboard. "I'm coming with you." The boat glided from the quay under a dark sail. The water rippled at the bow and splashed gently down the hull's length as we drew off into the bay. Galahad was stripping himself of the toga, which he tossed to the boatman, before dressing in war gear, while I stared back at the palace on the hill. It hung in the sky like a skyship sailing into clouds, or maybe like a star come down to earth, a place of dreams, a refuge where a just king and a beautiful queen ruled, and where poets sang and old men could study the wingspan of angels. It was so beautiful in Istrebes, so utterly beautiful, and, unless we could save it, doomed utterly. 2 years we fought. 2 years against all odds. 2 years of splendour and vileness. 2 years of slaughter and feast, of broken swords and shattered shields, of victory and disaster. And in all those months, and in all those sweated fights when brave men choked on their own lifeblood, and ordinary men did deeds they never dreamed possible, I never saw Lancelot once. Yet the poets say he was the hero of Benwick, the most perfect warrior, the fighter of fighters. The poets said that preserving Benwick was Lancelot's fight, not mine, not Galahad's, not Kilhuc's, but Lancelot's. But Lancelot spent the war in bed, begging his mother to bring him wine and honey. No, not always in bed. Lancelot was sometimes at a fight, but always a mile behind, so that he could be first back to Inistrebes with his news of victory. He knew how to tear a cloak, batter a sword edge, rumple his oiled hair, and even cut his face so that he staggered home looking the hero, and then his mother would have the Fili compose a new song, and the song would be carried to Britain by traders and seamen, so that even in distant Rheged, north of Elmet, they believed that Lancelot was the new Arthur. The Saxons feared his coming, while Arthur sent him the gift of an embroidered sword belt with a richly enamelled buckle. "You think life should be fair?" Killock asked me when I complained about the gift. "No, lord," I said. "Then don't waste breath on Lancelot," Killock said. He was the cavalry leader left behind in Armorica when Arthur went to Britain, and also a cousin of Arthur's, though he bore no resemblance to my lord. Killock was a squat, fiercely bearded, long-armed brawler who asked nothing of life but a plentiful supply of enemies, drink, and women. Arthur had left him in command of 30 men and horses, but the horses were all dead, and half the men were gone, so that now Killock fought on foot. I joined my men to his, and so accepted his command. He could not wait for the war in Benwick to end, so that he could fight again at Arthur's side. He adored Arthur. We fought a strange war. When Arthur had been in Armorica, the Franks were still some miles to the east, where the land was flat and cleared of trees, and thus ideal for his heavy horsemen. But now the enemy was deep inside the woods that cloaked the hills of central Benwick. King Ban, like Tudric of Gwent, had put his faith in fortifications. But where Gwent was ideally placed for massive forts and high walls, the woods and hills of Benwick offered the enemy too many paths that passed by the hilltop fortresses garrisoned by Ban's dispirited forces. Our job was to give those forces hope again, and we did it by using Arthur's own tactics of hard marches and surprise attacks. The wooded hills of Benwick were made for such battles, and our men were peerless. There are few joys to compare with the fight that follows an ambush well sprung, when the enemy is strung out and has his weapons sheathed. I put new scars on Howlbane's long edge. The Franks feared us. They called us forest wolves, and we adopted the insult as our symbol, and wore grey wolf tails on our helmets. We howled to frighten them, kept them awake night after night, stalked them for days, and sprang our ambushes when we wanted, and not when they were ready. Yet the enemy was many, and we were few, and month by month our numbers shrank. Galahad fought with us. He was a great fighter, yet he was also a scholar who had delved into his father's library, and he would talk at night of old gods, new religions, strange countries, and great men. I remember one night when we camped in a ruined villa. A week before, it had been a thriving settlement with its own fulling mill, pottery, and dairy, but the Franks had been there. And now the villa was a smoking ruin, splashed by blood, its walls tumbled and its spring poisoned with the corpses of women and children. Our sentries were guarding the paths in the woods, so we had the luxury of a fire, on which we roasted a brace of hares and a kid. We drank water, and pretended it was wine. "Falernian," Galahad said dreamily, holding his clay cup to the stars as though it were a golden flask. "Who's he?" Killock asked. "Falernian, my dear Killock, is a wine, a most pleasant Roman wine." "I never did like wine," Killock said, then yawned hugely. "A woman's drink! Now, Saxon ale, there's a drink for you." Within minutes he was asleep. Galahad could not sleep. The fire flickered low, while above us the stars shone bright. One fell, cutting its swift white path through the heavens, and Galahad made the sign of the cross, for he was a Christian, and to him a falling star was the sign of a demon falling from paradise.